Hello everybody, this is Glenn Maurer, and we're in for another episode of The Next Step, shown on TV Santa Barbara, and streamed onto Ustream and YouTube. If people are interested in seeing the show, they can certainly find it on Cable 17 in Santa Barbara, for those who have cable access in the town. But if you can't, you can go on to Ustream or YouTube, Google The Next Step TVSB, and you will get a choice between either the Google or the Ustream rebroadcasts of the program we've done today and programs we've done in the past. There's several years worth now that some of which are still, I think, of interest. Today we're going to talk about something a little more time sensitive than other programs we've had in the past because we're coming up on the last Saturday of January, and I learned that the last Saturday in January is National Seed Swap Day. I didn't know that until, not that I know about seed swaps, I've been to many and I've enjoyed them immensely, but it turns out here in Santa Barbara we're going to have the 8th annual National Seed Swap Day at the Faulkner Gallery at the Santa Barbara Main Library from, I think it's 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, something like that. And to discuss that with us are two of the people who are most responsible for this event, Margie Bushman, and Wes Rowe. Mm-hmm. Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you do. You folks are co-founders of the Santa Barbara Permaculture Center. Permaculture Network. It's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And that has a impetus to do things like seed swaps.
Yeah.
Our main focus is bringing events and workshops to the Santa Barbara area, and the seed swap is one of our favorites, and also it is held on Sunday, January 31st, not a Saturday.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The national seed swaps are a Saturday. The international, the one we took our cue from, is on Sunday, and we found that it worked better in our community because of farmers and farmers markets, and so we decided to hold it on Sunday.
Well, that's important to say, but the date is correct, January 31st.
Yeah.
And
11 to 3.
11 to 3 in the Faulkner Gallery at the Santa Barbara Main Library in downtown Santa Barbara.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. So tell us what we might expect there. Now, I have a slide of what some other seed swap people. Maybe we can get that on the screen in a moment. But meanwhile, tell us, why do they participate in the seed swap? What is it?
Seed swaps have taken place around the world for a long time. People have been swapping seeds forever, and it's to share.
Here's a picture. Let me just interrupt you one, and you'll see that that's the kind of thing that you might see in Santa Barbara, right? Mm-hmm. And what's in those packages?
Those packages are seeds that people have grown out from their gardens, let their plants go to seed. Hopefully the idea is that you're letting the most robust plant, you're saving from those plants, saving them and coming and bringing them to the seed swap. And that's the idea of a swap. And it can be other plant material as well. Our seed swap and many seed swaps are also just providing free seeds. We're encouraging people to get started with their gardens. And so you don't need to bring seeds to participate.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I know that there's a certain intimidation that you're not part of the group. You're not inside, you're not an insider, you don't know who these folks are, and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing there.
Yeah.
But I've gone there, just walked in the door of seed swaps around the country with my wife, who is a big fan of raising plants from seed, and it's comfortable.
It's so fun. It is that you come in and we have what we call a seed island, and people wander around that and they're able to choose seeds that they want to take home. In the middle of the seed island is usually we have different people, volunteers and others with a lot of plant knowledge for people to ask questions. And at our seed swap we also have the Santa Barbara Seed Saving Guild, who are there. They're one of our co-sponsors, and they're there to provide. So people getting started with either seed saving or gardens, there are people to help and share knowledge and information.
Yeah, and it's like, it is one of the most comfortable places to go just to exchange seed and knowledge. We usually sometimes have the 3 or 4 deep around the seed island, which is the big place. It's in the center of the library. And what happens is then people start exchanging knowledge, seed, whatever.
Well, I think that's part of it too that's important, the exchange of knowledge. that
Yeah.
you're not just,
Yeah.
you know, you don't have to be into arcane information when you show up. You can ask a person, I live in
Yeah, well-
in an environment that's cool.
Right.
What should I be thinking about growing there? Or have you had experience with this plant in dry areas?
Right. Well, we have like
Yeah.
4 areas that we can call distinct climates in Santa Barbara. So the seed saver, Santa Barbara Seed Savers
Guild, yeah.
Guild sometimes grows out seed in all 4. It'll be up at Mesa Harmony Gardens. It's out at Trinity.
Which is on the Mesa.
Which is Trinity, and then 2 other sites. And the idea behind that is to get seeds that adapt to the particular climate, microclimates that are in every community.
But there's the seed swap I could call it movement or not.
Yeah, right.
But the seed swap event is international, as you mentioned. I mean, you folks have gone around the world and participated in something.
Yes, and we are a part of the permaculture world for many, many years, and part of that is going to international permaculture convergences. And so there's a conference and a convergence, and the convergence is where everyone comes together to share knowledge. And from most recently, we were in London in the UK, but from Croatia to Jordan to Africa to Brazil, every one of them, a main feature was showcasing their seed material. It isn't, that isn't all that permaculture is about, plants and growing food. It's much more than that, but that is a key significant part for every culture to maintain for it to be a sustainable culture.
Yeah.
So this is a underground, that's a bad joke.
Right.
You've heard that joke before, but I didn't mean it intentionally, it just came out. But this is a people kind of ground up event in which folks who are interested in just growing their own food and preserving certain plants that may disappear participate. There is some sort of politics in this, and some people say, in the sense that it's a sort of an attempt to avoid commercialization of plants. Is there some truth to that?
Well, there's a wanting to maintain the diversity of seeds, plant material, and even genetic material. And so until very recently, no one patented life. It was illegal to patent life. And now, of course, it is. And that throws things into a whole nother world. And the industrial agriculture, the plants that are available now is something, there's all kinds of percentages, but we've lost about 90% of food varieties.
You can see, like, there was a chart that I found, like, from 1900 to now, and then tracking the different individual crops, and sometimes you had 400 or 500 varieties.
And now down to 37 for something like lettuce or whatever the plant is.
Let's talk about something most people are familiar with, heirloom tomatoes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's one thing that many backyard gardeners and homeowners want to participate in. For years, it was like Champion or some commercial product that you could grow relatively safely. Not a great tomato, but not a bad tomato.
Right.
But then it was eliminating a huge variety of other products. And part of the seed swap is to bring those products back into use.
Yeah, and many times we have, people have always exchanged seeds through, if you read Jared Diamond's book, Gun, Steel, whatever, that is just the movement of people moving crops and exchanging and then adapting them. And the beautiful story I once heard on an NPR story was how peaches started in the South, because they were mainly in China where they first started, and then when they came into the United States, they were in Florida. And it took like 50-year cycles as they moved north until certain, and each time varieties developed. And then by the time they made it to Ontario, where I was born, there was a whole different variety of peaches, but adapted to the specific amount of light and the growing season.
So slowly moving this product changes it. It'll adapt to its best chance to survive. You don't have to.
Sure.
You can't just stick a plant that does well in Miami commercial orange groves into someplace in California. It has to move into it.
And humans are very ingenious for doing that and have developed so many things by a slow, steady movement of, altitude or whatever. And then, one of the neat things, there was a guy, Bill McDormand, who we brought to Santa Barbara. He's run seed companies for 30 years. And one of the reasons he got in is because 30 or 40 years ago, most of the small seed growers were going out of business.
Right.
And he came out of the 60s, like all of us, and wanting to grow our own food, and suddenly found out that the sources of seed were just drying up, and the amount of small seed growers were vanishing.
My wife and I did have a chance to go to High Mowing in Vermont, which is a seed producer of honest plants.
Oh, yeah.
And they sell all over the world.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see this honest to goodness small town group sitting there dividing up little packages of small seeds and distributing them into the world at large. What is the advantage? I mean, you alluded to it and we discussed it, but what is the serious threat if we end up with a monoculture? What is the serious threat to maybe the human ability to produce sufficient foods? Is it just because they don't taste as good, or is there something more?
Something much more.
Much more, yeah.
The loss of diversity in the genetic material alone, I mean, nature is, the purpose of evolution is to evolve to whatever the conditions are. And when you bring everything down to a small number, and with farmers in the past never purchased their seeds. They shared, or they grew their own seeds, and they had it for the next, or they grew. And now most industrial agriculture farmers are more or less purchasing the right to use those seeds, and they're not able to naturalize seeds to their own, as we were speaking about just a second ago, to the conditions that are happening in that region. And you can naturalize seeds in a much faster way. It doesn't take hundreds of years to naturalize, or something specific to those soils, or specific to that, as Wes said, the climate or the climate changing. Seeds, open pollinated seeds, can begin to do that because they're sharing genetic material back and forth.
Also, as we call it, you'll hear this more and more, nutrient-dense food, whereas a lot of the breeded seeds by international companies are bred for certain specifics, but not necessarily to provide a wholesome food for you. When you eat that, and so you get looks. Sometimes they've tried on the square tomatoes. I know that. But the thing that really scares me is we're always evolving. Nature's always evolving. When you go to a monoculture, it's always evolving pests and stuff to balance us out, and diseases and everything else. And when you narrow your genetic material, you're susceptible to complete collapse of food.
Well, let me try to focus back down on that idea. When I say monoculture, which you certainly, we all know what it, a general idea, maybe the audience doesn't quite get it, but the idea is having thousands and thousands of acres producing one type of corn. No other corns, no other hybriding, nothing else is happening in that environment. And then you have the threat of, as you said, even though it's designed or even chemically protected from certain insects, it will become the dominant crop, and then once the collapse happens, it happens completely.
Yeah, we've had one already. It was corn collapsed in 1970, just wiped out 70% of the crop. And there's the famous potato famine.
It's not a good position for humanity to be in, really.
So that's a lack of diversity, that you're relying on all your eggs in one basket kind of idea, and when that basket falls, everything's done for until you can revive and restore a balanced environment.
Right. And the beauty, really the wonderful part of a seed swap, for instance, and this is humans and seeds coming together, is that if you have gardeners or farmers growing for their best crop and their best plant, and they make a point of saving that most robust, that's very different than an industrial, very large fields of plants being grown for seeds and nobody going out there and looking for the best possible seed.
Well, they're looking for a combination of best commercially. Best
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
ones
And
you
they're
can
growing on
transport.
such scale that they're just taking that and bringing it in, and it's supposed to be across the country or the nation, this one seed to satisfy all of our requirements, and that's not possible, really.
And then a lot of times they have shied away from perennials because you have perennial turnips, you have so many crops used to have perennial. And we have narrowed them down to just the annual. And I was just recently at West Jackson's place in Kansas, the Land Institute, and saw the perennial wheat that has now successfully been harvested. It's been growing for 7 years. I visited the plots. And successfully now they have their first crop, and I think Patagonia is going to be one of their main buyers of their wheat crop to put into different products that Patagonia makes. And these kinds of things.
Patagonia Company.
Patagonia Company. And the thing is like in the prairies, we used to have perennial grasses. When I just wandered through the prairies, and I mean, I took a couple of 1,000-mile trip, and I wandered through all these small towns, visited all over, talked to people, saw what was growing there, visited the grasslands. We have an amazing grasslands. We have short prairie grasslands. We have tall prairie grass. This is left over from the buffalo times. And we have, and in these communities, I saw that that the monoculture was just causing their whole communities to just fall apart.
Another aspect of this commercial monoculture type thinking are, we talked a little bit, you alluded slightly to it, patented seeds, but I want to talk about that in a little bit. But the other thing that they're doing is that a lot of these commercial seeds are treated with things like neonicotinoids that are almost certainly harmful to bees and other polluting insects. There's a huge amount of chemicals are put on the seed,
Right.
theoretically to protect that product as it's growing, but wiping out diversity in that community. And one of the advantages of seed swaps, I assume, is none of that's happening.
No.
Exactly.
We don't really let people bring treated seed in, because a lot of it has something called capsin, which is just pretty toxic. And then you're putting it in the ground, in your soil, with your seed.
Right, and
it's kind of interesting that you have a toxic coating when you're kind of trying to grow food.
Well, it's
And
supposed to
you're-
be toxic just to the bugs, not
Yeah,
to the
right.
people.
Yeah, and it's
You know
like
how
you-
well that works.
Yeah, and you have this, you're trying to grow food, and you're actually adding more toxins to your soil as you do through your seed. And that's what we don't do those connections many times.
So you think that as a result of movements like this, and not academic movements, I know there's huge
Yeah.
seed storage facilities around the world that have collected products from everywhere, but do you think because of grassroots movements, more like those seed banks, that we are expanding in the last 15 or 20 years, making an impact on the expansion of foodstuffs that people now have experience with?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we just hope to encourage that, and that is very much a part of the permaculture movement. And we really feel that seed saving is the most permaculture thing that people can do, because you're not putting it away in a seed bank somewhere and trying to maintain the right conditions and the safety, but you're growing it out in your own community for your own community's food security. That for whatever happens or in the future, that we have our own seed supply specific to our own region and climate. And
That used to exist. In LA, they used to have about 30 seed companies at one time
Right, yeah.
in LA County, which was, believe it or not, the most productive food county in the United States.
Los Angeles. Well, it was a lot of agriculture there. When I was young, I remember
Yeah.
walking to junior high school one morning when it was a clear spring morning and the mountains were covered with snow. And I was in really what's downtown Los Angeles now.
Yeah.
But I could see the mountains, the clearness of the sky. I could smell citrus in the air. You know, it was just a sense of being among real plants. You wouldn't get that today in that part of town,
No.
unfortunately.
But the thing I think that you alluded to was that food is now really important to people. There's an incredible food movement, and if we ever look, like I always say, there's leverage points of change. That's a big leverage point of change.
Yes, it is,
Food
and I
right
think
now.
that's important.
And the chefs now, when you go to like City College and you take their chef course, they're not just learning about making food now, they're learning about where their food comes from, and they're also learning the connection about growing food. And many chefs now, they won't hire a chef to work for them unless they know that they've been involved in actually the growing of food. And that's a real big change. There's many chefs that have their own gardens connected. And then if you go to our farmers market, you'll see the chefs always with their picking up food from the farmers market and actually advertising that they're using local food. But as Margie and I, we started 8-9 years ago, said we need local food, local seeds to have local food.
Absolutely, because they produce good food locally at a reasonable way. And I think the other point that we need to allude to also about local food is that it's so much more energy efficient. You don't transport the products, all this pollution that creates. You don't have to harvest them when they're green and do all these other things. So local products all over the world. Buy local is not just the idea, well, I know the guy who grew it, but it makes economic and environmental sense from so many ways.
Well, you know, the high level of waste in the food system is probably about 35%. That's probably...
we did a show on this, and I think the 40% number was 35 to 40%.
Not only are you transporting food, you're actually just you're overproducing food to throw it away. And so that's a big tax, because any kind of food growing takes a certain amount of energy and resources. And now we're always producing more food when we throw away almost half of it. In our transportation system, even though it has refrigeration and everything else, still has a high level of waste. And when Margie and I were in Cuba, they don't have the refrigerated trucks on the road moving food. So their food, because they're, as everybody wants to say, they have the lowest footprint, carbon footprint, but with that carbon footprint, they have to really think about where food comes from, because they don't have the complicated distribution system that we do.
And probably that's, as long as they have a ability to grow it locally from good, honest product, that's a good idea. But let's talk about there's some other issues here about the legal side of swapping and introducing new products into environments. I mean, I know some people are concerned that there are products being brought into places they shouldn't be, and they're sort of threatening to the other existing plants that are already there, and this whole concern about invasive species and all that. Is there anything issue at all about that we should be attending to when we think about swapping and trading plants?
Well, it's a complicated subject, and we'll steer clear of most, but most cultivated plants for the garden are not the invasive that we're talking about, although we're a global community now, and people are coming from all over the world, and maybe they shouldn't be, or people should be very conscious about that, what they plant somewhere near to maybe the wildlands or something. You should think about that and be very careful. But a seed swap, where people are exchanging food growing, are not usually the invasives.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention, and we did mention in the previous show, and you've alluded to it here, it sounds in a way that what we're saying is, well, somebody's going to grow a few tomatoes in their backyard, or they're going to grow an orange tree, or they're going to have some turnips or some beets or whatever for themselves. They'll just make it for their own family, which is wonderful, fresh, can't get better than that. But there's also a whole bunch of that product that's contributed to the general community, because these growers often produce more than they can consume.
Sure.
So we've talked a bit about that about the food bank and other groups that collect gleaning these foods, and so part of what goes on here is it's sort of a hobbyish aspect to it, that people grow food that they can share with others.
Yeah.
Nature is prolific, and seeds are prolific, and so it really, if people get in the habit of growing again, and not everyone's going to grow, but it is so, one tiny seed grows a plant, and it gives 200 seeds or whatever. So that is really what's being expressed even at a seed swap, is this abundance, that's available, and that we're more and more thinking about how there's less and less, and there's actually, if we begin to share on this way of these seed swaps.
Yeah, and growing food brings people together. I know if it's in the 70s, back in Canada, I planted beets and took out a chunk of my lawn and planted beets. I had more people knocking at my door.
Right. You have too much food. It's
Yeah,
not
no, they
enough.
weren't asking for food. They were saying, "Did you realize that you planted beets?" And that's the way I've got a discussion going with my neighbors, was to plant beets in the front yard. And they really came to talk to me, mainly to kind of point out my errors.
It's interesting because I think certainly in my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation, the idea of growing food for your own use and putting up that food for the winter
Yeah.
was very common.
Oh, yeah.
We got through a period of time when that was considered sort of embarrassing.
Right, yeah, you're poor.
Yeah, you were poor, you couldn't go down to the store and buy that
Right,
nice
yeah, right.
can of those
Yeah,
great
right.
tomatoes and all that.
Yeah.
And so now we're back to the idea that preserving our own foods and keeping our own foods is
I think
is good.
it's one of the best, the food everybody eats, everybody comes to the table. And that's what we have in our community. When you serve food, good food, people talk to each other, they share. It's the same way as when they come to the seed swap, they're talking about their best plants. We have somebody from Isla Vista who grows these really specialized carrots. And he arrives with a jar full of seeds, this much. That's more carrots than our whole seed swap will ever need. But he sits there giving them out and talking about them. But we build those histories of people by doing this, because everyone's starting. Like this young man in Lompoc who arrived 3 years ago to our seed swap and said, "Where's my table?" We're like, "Who are you?" He said, "Well, I have seeds to give away." And he proceeded to fill a table with all his seeds. But the beautiful thing, his mom and his son and his other brother were there.
Well, I think we're starting to wind down here. So
Yeah.
we just had your the group on logo on the screen, and is there any one message that in the next few moments that you would like to share with this audience and maybe encourage them to participate?
Sure,
Come
yeah.
on down.
Yes.
It is a community event, and volunteers are welcome. And we have also, didn't really mention that we have exhibitors. We have surrounding the area of the Seed Island, we have people from all kinds of organizations that you can learn from as well. The beekeepers,
How can people, we've got 10 seconds.
Okay.
Santa Barbara Permaculture
Okay,
Network,
network.
how do we contact you?
Okay, so it's...
our website is
It's-
www.sbpermaculture.org.
And we have a Facebook page for the Santa Barbara Annual Community Seed Swap. And so you're on Facebook and find us and come on Sunday.
Okay, I got confused about the time because I didn't know if they'd reset the clock, but I think we're done. Are we done, gals?